I find that I'm a person who
So I've just watched Keir Starmer and Donald Trump have their Q&A session, their press conference jointly, because Donald Trump has been in the country. And watching it, the press were trying to do this thing where they were trying to drive a wedge between Trump and Starmer, and they both did quite a good job of not not allowing that to happen. It was all business, basically. But on a few of the questions, I was struck by how Starmer didn't seem prepared. He seemed like he was stuttering. He seemed like he just wasn't expecting certain questions to be asked. Like, for example, they said, well, Trump has designated Antifa a terrorist organization. Are you going to follow suit and say the same thing? It was obvious that he hadn't been briefed on a question like that being asked. And he ended up stuttering. He was like, we make our own decisions in this country. It's like the Starm bot needed to be rebooted. And it started me thinking about, like, why is Keir Starmer such a poor leader? Why has he been such a disaster as the Prime Minister? And it reminded me of a bit from The Rest is Politics, a video I already talked about yesterday. I said I might return to it. Well, now I've watched that, I am going to return to it, because they talked about some of the differences between Keir Starmer and Tony Blair, and why Starmer seems like such a poor leader. I'm going to get into it after promo code SHREDDER gets you 25% off all courses. Buy it now, watch this advert, and then when I come back, I'm going to talk more about Keir Starmer's leadership or lack thereof. It's promo code SHREDDER. World-class education denied to you by school, denied to you by woke university. Well, no more. Pick up your course today. 25% off all courses with promo code SHREDDER. That's SHREDDER. Buy it now. So I'm going to play you the clip from Alistair Campbell and Rory Stewart, Rest is Politics, where they started getting into this. One of the things I have to say about Campbell and Stewart is that I often start getting really interested in something that Alistair Campbell is saying, and Monkey Face Stewart often cuts him off, or they leave a thought dangling, and Stewart comes in with some stupid study that he's read or something, which I find irritating, because the most interesting stuff, the most interesting insights we get into in Rest is Politics, and why I bother listening to it at all, is these little tidbits of what Blair was like to work with, what it's like to be the Director of Communications or the Chief of Staff behind the scenes, jobs that Alistair Campbell has done, some of this kind of inside baseball stuff. Well, on this particular show, they started talking about the wheels coming off Labour, how Starmer can cling on, because it looks like he's on the brink of going, at least he was last week, following the departure of Mandelson and a few other people, a week after the reshuffle and Angela Rayner going, of course. So this is the context for this conversation they were having, and they started to focus a lot on the role of Morgan McSweeney, and the difference between being the front of the camera, the Prime Minister, the leader, and this kind of Svengali character, the backstage advisor, the Machiavelli, or the Alistair Campbell, if you want. I'm going to let it play, and then when I come back, I'll give some thoughts.
My sense is, here's the Prime Minister, he's going to Prime Minister question. It's his responsibility to make sure that he's confident and comfortable about everything he's going to say. But it's his team's responsibility, given all the stuff he's having to deal with, to make sure he knows everything that is relevant to the question.
Okay, let me make the case for Morgan McSweeney then.
Yep.
Right at the heart of this is Morgan McSweeney, who people like you and me and the Westminster class talk about all the time, but maybe not all listeners are focused on, who is effectively the great Chief of Staff power behind the throne for Keir Starmer. He's a man who cut his teeth in Labour politics in local councils in London, and who led, at least in the narrative of his supporters, Starmer's takeover of the Labour Party and the fight back against Jeremy Corbyn. Okay, so the case for Morgan McSweeney is, here is this morally serious man who thinks deeply, who has a clear vision of the country. He's somebody who speaks emotionally and powerfully about the grooming gangs and how much he feels responsibility and how heads should have rolled, who really believes in trying to bring control over immigration, who feels that he's got a mission to transform the economy of Britain. So he would say, look, what is this trip really about? It's about me, Morgan McSweeney, thinking about, as you say, about Google investment, US tech, partnerships with Europe on agriculture and industry, small modular nuclear reactors, which Morgan McSweeney cares about.
You hold on, Rory. You fall into a trap here, I think, of assuming that the chief of staff person or the main advisor should be somebody with their own agenda. The Dominic Cummings, Boris Johnson situation. That is not good for a government. It's not good for a prime minister if people think that there is somebody, that this is not the prime minister's agenda, it's somebody else's agenda. So I think even you thinking and talking in those terms, I thought you were going to come at it from a different perspective, but you're basically saying, well, poor old Morgan can't be dealing with everything because he's having to sort out deals on nuclear reactors and so forth. Well, that's not really his job.
Yeah, the defense of Morgan McSweeney, I think, is that he's the grown-up, that he's crippled by having this prime minister who isn't really able to articulate Morgan McSweeney's vision properly. And who?
Sorry, I'm not buying this at all. No, I'm not. No,
the story is supposed to be that here is this amazingly serious, impressive chief of staff, and unfortunately, every time he sends Starmer out to communicate his message, Starmer somehow doesn't quite have the language to express what
I can't work out
and that McSweeney keeps getting let down. McSweeney really would want to stop the boats. He'd really want to control immigration. But unfortunately, Yvette Cooper didn't deliver for him. So he's bringing Shabana Mahmood to try to sort it out.
I can't believe whether you actually believe this or you're responding to all those friends of yours in Tory circles who tell you that we don't fall out enough and disagree.
Oh, no, I'm getting this. I'm getting this, obviously, from Labour people who are on the McSweeney end. So I suppose these are people who see themselves as more Shabana Mahmood, more conservative Labour, who believe that what the Labour Party needs to do is really connect with working class voters, needs to have a coherent vision, and they seem to think that the one person in the middle of all of this is Morgan McSweeney, and if it's not working for him, it's not McSweeney's fault.
You either are the strategist and you take ownership of the whole strategy, in which case it's a bit much for these friends to say, well, it's all Keir Starmer's fault. Or you make sure, because this is part of what strategy is, that the whole team, and most importantly, the leader of the team, are completely aligned. I think this is a consequence. I think the way that you're even talking about this is a consequence of there being too much focus on Morgan McSweeney's role. As there was, and listen, by the way, I had exactly this situation.
Were you accused, though, of the strategy, or were you accused more of the management of the communications?
Well, I was a lightning conductor when anything went wrong.
And did people sort of try to suggest that in the same way that I'm suggesting with Keir, that really it's Alistair's government and Tony?
The thing with me used to be, he's the real deputy prime minister, so it was a way of undermining John Prescott.
But not that you're the real prime minister.
No, what there was for a time. I mean, I think the reason the Conservatives got into such a mess with us was because they couldn't work out how to handle Tony Blair. So part of their attack was that Tony Blair's just this sort of flim-flam PR guy, and the real engine is me and Peter Mandelson.
Right.
These dark, sinister people. So that was their kind of line of attack. There's a bit of that with Morgan. But I think the other thing is, like when that book came out, the Patrick Maguire book about sort of the rise of Keir Starmer came in, called Get In. And it wasn't really about Keir Starmer. Now, I think that's bad for him and it's bad for the government. So that is something which has developed. I think that's the wrong way to read this. And I think there's far too much focus on more. I'm not, by the way, saying that Morgan didn't put together a very effective election strategy. What I do think is that government is very, very different to campaigning. And I also think that the thing about personnel, now to be fair, Keir's gone out and got Jonathan Powell, and now Tim Allen's come in. And I know these people, I think, well, I think they can do a good job. But ultimately, I would argue that nobody in those positions can do a really, really good job unless there is alignment with the team, and in particular that the leader is driving that. That's the most important thing. So it's actually weakening of Keir for somebody like you who follows this closely and talks to people, even to think in these terms.
And I think they've actually gone to the root of the problem, which is that Keir Starmer has always come across like he's somebody else's man, whether it is literally being in the shadow of Tony Blair, who is still around, advising, of course, as we all know, or whether he is having his strings pulled by Morgan McSweeney or various other advisors. He always seems like the vacuum, the void in the middle of a team of advisors. Like Starmer doesn't have his own ideas, like he's literally just being manoeuvred into place, and he's this empty suit who requires programming like a robot by the likes of Morgan McSweeney. And one of the very interesting things from Campbell and Stewart, from Campbell really, is when he has talked about how Tony Blair worked, how Blair would listen to the opinions of everybody, then he'd write them all down, he'd summarise them all, and then he'd make a decision as to what the line would be at the start of the week with an executive summary, and then he'd be like, right, we've made a decision, I'm the boss, this is the line for the next week, you all go out there and do your jobs. So Blair very much led from the top. Okay, he took opinions on board, but when he made a decision, that decision was final. Where it seems like in Starmer's case, Starmer doesn't seem to take any decisions. He's constantly just kind of following the advice of all of these Svengali figures and doesn't actually seem to step up and lead in those moments where he needs to lead. It's such a contrast with Blair, who led from the front and actually had ideas of his own. And then on top of that, there is also, as part of Campbell and Stewart's analysis, and Rory Stewart was going on this, I could tell Campbell didn't want to go there, but basically what Stewart was saying is that Keir Starmer's football manager stats, his actual raw skills as a politician, aren't good enough for him to be able to pull this off. I.e., Starmer can't give a decent speech, he doesn't have great skills of organisation, he's actually not a very good top trumps card. If people are interested in this, by the way, I have actually devised a football manager stats rating system for politics, and several people have suggested it might be fun to do a video looking at various people giving the football manager stats for politics. Keir Starmer, he is not a great public orator. He doesn't get high front of camera ratings, but for all intents and purposes, he doesn't have particularly great backstage skills either. Every decision he makes seems to be the wrong one, and he always seems to be, following somebody else's lead, or, he just seems to be this empty void in the middle. He is becoming a lesson in what not to be. If Tony Blair, who wrote this book on leadership, which I did videos on before, is a model of what a leader should be, Keir Starmer is rapidly becoming, the example of everything not to be. Not only in terms of his raw skills, or lack of skills thereof, but in his failure to step up in these moments and lead from the front, to take decisions, to tell various advisors, no, we're going to do it this way, or, it really is up to the leader. And this is the trouble that Starmer's always had, okay? He feels like he's somebody else's man. He seems like a regime man. He seems like a kind of system suit, is what he seems like. And he's never felt like he's actually in control. Joe Biden was a bit like this when he was the president as well. Whereas the best leaders, Blair's a good example, actually give a feeling that it makes a difference that they're there. That maybe other decisions may have been taken, but his force of personality, his force of leadership actually made certain things happen, and it did actually make a difference. Okay, this is why I believe to some extent Tony Blair actually was in power, whereas somebody like Keir Starmer, you could say, well, this guy's just an empty puppet, basically, because he just seems to go along with whatever advice is being given at a time. Another problem he's got, of course, is that even when he's given good advice, because I actually think that some aspect of what Stewart was saying was true, i.e. that Morgan McSweeney has the right ideas. The Blue Labour is a winning political formula, and that, if they were able to pull it off, if they had a decent team there, right, who actually believed in the message. This is another problem. I don't think Keir Starmer believes in anything, right? But let's pretend that Keir Starmer actually believed in this stuff, and he was actually good. He had good Football Manager stats. McSweeney, I think, with a different team, with Tony Blair's cabinet, for example, and with Blair as the leader, would have been able to, use this opportunity of the big majority to actually make this Labour government, this Labour ministry, a success rather than the total disaster that it's been. But it required not only ideas, right, and strategy, which is what McSweeney is giving, but execution and conviction and ability to follow through on all those things. So I actually think it's on Keir Starmer twice, right? Once on his failure to actually lead, as I talked about, but also to take Stewart's analysis into account, his failure to actually execute the very good advice he has been getting from the likes of Blair and McSweeney. I actually do think that Blair and McSweeney have the right ideas, right? The trouble they've got and the problem they've had from the start, not only is Starmer a dud, right, but the Labour Party is not in the kind of disciplined shape it was back in 2001, 2002 sort of era. It's a mess. It's full of idiots, basically. The less popular they become, the more they lose that discipline, the more counter-messaging there is, and so on and so forth. So, that's my assessment of what's going on, and this is why Keir Starmer is a very poor leader. All right, pick up a course, promo code SHREDDER, and I'll catch you later on for office hours.
If you like this video, be sure to like and subscribe. You can join the channel for thousands of hours of past shows in the archive and hundreds of videos. If you have any questions, you can leave a super chat or a super thanks, and I'll be sure to pick it up during my weekly office hours, which run every Tuesday afternoon. I also provide courses at the academic agency, which I encourage people to buy. Thousands of students now have taken the Trivium to improve their skills in writing, logic and rhetoric. Just 3 of many courses available. Buy it now. But most importantly of all, friends, get out.